At the age of 43, John F. Kennedy was the youngest ever elected president of the United States. He portrayed himself as brimming with health and vitality. In reality, he had the most complex health history of anyone to occupy the White House and was taking a crazy cocktail of medication including steroids, amphetamines, barbiturates, opiate painkillers and testosterone. I'm Professor Graham Yorston, neuropsychiatrist, and today I'm exploring the alarming and for a long time carefully covered up medical history of John F. Kennedy and asking what it could have done to his mind. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was born in 1917 into a privileged life, the second born of 9 children. As a 2-year-old, he had a nasty case of scarlet fever, a highly contagious bacterial infection that killed 4,000 children a year in the US at that time, and he had to spend 2 months in hospital and then recuperating in a sanatorium. Throughout the 1920s, he came down with pretty much every childhood disease going, and his parents often worried that he wasn't going to pull through. His brother Bobby later joked that if a mosquito bit Jack, the mosquito would die. His ill health continued into his school years. At 13, he stopped growing, lost weight, and was constantly exhausted. And despite seeing some of the best doctors in the country, no one was able to work out what was going on. He eventually collapsed with abdominal pains, and a surgeon removed his appendix, but this didn't improve his symptoms at all. Throughout his college days, he continued to have serious gastro-intestinal problems and had numerous admissions to hospital for investigations and treatment. He also started getting back pain, which would eventually lead him to have 4 separate surgeries with little benefit. It has even been suggested that the brace he wore to support his back cost him his life, as it kept him upright and in the trajectory of that second and fatal bullet in Dallas in 1963. But that's the end of the story. Let's start at the beginning. A few months after his appendectomy in 1931, he started at Coate, a prestigious boarding school where his brother, Joe Kennedy Jr., was a football player and top student. Jack couldn't compete physically or academically, so he started to establish his own identity as a bit of a rebel by blowing up a toilet seat with a firecracker, a rebelliousness that stayed with him for the rest of his life. He was significantly underweight, and over the winter his abdominal problems continued, along with months of flu-like symptoms and almost constant pain in his knees. Things improved for a while, but just after his 16th birthday he was ill again, and his parents sent him to the famous Mayo Clinic for tests. It was suspected he might have a stomach ulcer, so he was put on bed rest and prescribed a bland diet of peas, corn and prunes. When he started passing blood, his doctor's attention turned to the other end, and he wrote to a friend, "Yesterday I went through the most harassing experience of my life. A doctor stuck an iron tube 12 inches long and 1 inch in diameter up my ass. My poor bedraggled rectum is looking at me very reproachfully these days." He was eventually diagnosed with colitis, a potentially fatal condition at the time, which was treated with a restricted diet, avoidance of stress, and injections of horse serum. The following year, he was back in hospital. This time, his doctors thought he might have leukemia. Fortunately, it wasn't, and he was able to go back to school to graduate, finishing 64th in a class of 112. But no sooner was the gown off his back than he was back in hospital for more tests. In 1935, he started at Princeton, but had to leave after 6 weeks because his old problems resurfaced again. He even joked that his doctors were measuring him up for a coffin. The following year, he tried Harvard, and things went a bit better this time. But in 1938, he was back in the Mayo Clinic for yet more tests. Still, there were no answers, and another 2-week admission followed with the same symptoms. When yet another admission to the Mayo Clinic was recommended, he put his foot down and refused. But college life wasn't all bad. He did enjoy periods of better health when he managed some sporting activities and picked up, how can I put this delicately, a social disease which he never really shook off, causing urological problems for the rest of his life, which required large doses of sulfur drugs and penicillin during flare-ups. On the very day of the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, he needed a big shot of antibiotics to fight off another episode of discharging urethritis. Another problem that began at Harvard was low back pain. It began after playing football, but got worse after he felt something slip during a game of tennis. He was hospitalised for 10 days and it was managed conservatively with a manipulation under anaesthetic. But for the rest of his life he was prone to further incapacitating episodes of back pain, for which he sought more and more extreme remedies. I've dealt with his back problems in a separate video, so that I could concentrate on what was the most serious of his medical problems, Addison's disease. Addison's disease, also known as adrenal insufficiency, is a rare condition in which the adrenal glands make too little cortisol, and often too little of another hormone, aldosterone, that is involved in controlling the body's sodium and potassium levels. It can cause any and sometimes all of the following symptoms: extreme fatigue, poor appetite and weight loss, increased skin pigmentation, low blood pressure and fainting, low blood sugar, gastro-intestinal problems, muscle and joint pain, irritability and depression, loss of body hair, reproductive issues. The lack of cortisol means that any kind of stress can result in a severe reaction called an Addisonian crisis, a life-threatening medical emergency. This is exactly what happened when he visited England in 1947. Nowadays, it is easily diagnosed and treated with hormone replacement therapy, but it wasn't quite as simple back then. His doctor in London, Dr. Daniel Davis, a personal physician to King George VI, predicted that he probably wouldn't last a year. After initial stabilisation, he was shipped back to the US on the Queen Mary, but he was so sick on the crossing that a priest was arranged to administer last rites. The cover story for the press was that he had a recurrence of malaria contracted in the Pacific during his military service. He was treated with an early, weak, synthetic adrenal hormone called deoxycorticosteroid acetate, or DOCA. This was implanted in pellet form under the skin of his thigh every 3 months. In 1950, cortisone became available in oral form, and this was added to his DOCA implants. Although he improved with treatment, he remained at risk of potentially fatal crises if he was put under too much stress, developed an infection, or had surgery. For his back operation in 1954, the risks of surgery had to be carefully weighed up, but he told his father that even if the risks were 50-50, he would rather be dead than spend the rest of his life hobbling on crutches and paralysed by pain. In 1955, he was also diagnosed with low thyroid levels and began treatment with replacement therapy. This second hormone deficiency syndrome has led to the suggestion that Kennedy might have had what is now known as autoimmune polyendocrine syndrome, or APS2, a condition in which the immune system attacks cells of the hormone-producing glands. Some people with APS2 also have atrophic gastritis and celiac disease, so it is possible that his lifelong gastrointestinal symptoms could have been part of this syndrome as well. Earlier in his career, it had been easy enough to deflect the media from commenting on his long hospital stays, but this was never going to work if he was running for president. Between May 1955 and October 1957, as he was preparing for his presidential campaign, he was hospitalised 9 times for a total of 45 days. His rival for the nomination, Lyndon B. Johnson, knew his history and told the press that he had Addison's and would therefore never be able to cope with the stress of being president. This was masterfully covered up by his pain specialist, Dr. Janet Travell, saying that JFK does not now, nor has he ever had, an ailment described classically as Addison's disease, which is a tuberculous destruction of the adrenal gland. Technically, this statement is not a lie, as it refers to the first description of the disease by Thomas Addison in 1855. All 6 of the cases he described were due to damage to the adrenal glands by tuberculosis. However, in developed countries, 80% of cases have an autoimmune cause, as Dr. Travell well knew. Her carefully worded statement succeeded in deflecting further probing into JFK's medical issues, and arguably deceived the American public into believing that he was fit and healthy. It is possible that his opponent in the election, Richard Nixon, may have tried to get a little dirt on his rival by sneaking a peek at Kennedy's medical notes. In Watergate-like circumstances, thieves ransacked the office of his endocrinologist. Files beginning with K were scattered everywhere, but they failed to find his records as they were filed under a code name. The thieves then tried unsuccessfully to break into the office of Dr. Travell. Nothing was ever proved, but it was all rather suspicious. After reaching the White House, Kennedy believed it was more essential than ever to hide his afflictions, and the day after his victory, in response to a reporter's question, he declared himself to be in excellent shape and dismissed the rumours of Addison's disease as false. The true state of his health was a carefully guarded secret, even from his closest aides. His secretary made sure that he took his medication on time, but she had limited knowledge of what they were or why he needed them. We know from the records that he regularly took the steroids hydrocortisone, prednisone, and fludrocortisone for his Addison's disease, diphenoxylate and atropine to control his diarrhea, thyroid hormone, the amphetamine stimulant methylphenidate, which is usually reserved for people with ADHD, and painkillers, including the opiates pethidine and methadone, sleeping tablets and tranquilizers, plus testosterone. It has been suggested that he was on testosterone to keep his weight up, and he took it throughout his presidency. But this doesn't explain why he requested extra doses at times. Any change of dose would take several weeks to have an effect, so having short booster doses makes no medical sense, and one can only speculate as to why he was asking his doctors for extra. So why is a psychiatrist so interested in JFK's physical health? The answer is that most of his medication can affect mental functioning, especially when used in combination. Slowed thinking with tranquilizers, increased aggression with testosterone, impulsive decision-making with stimulants. Plus, Addison's disease on its own can lead to psychiatric symptoms, most commonly depression, but cases of psychosis have also been described. It's kind of scary to think that the man with his finger on the nuclear button during the highest tension phase of the Cold War could easily have been abnormally irritable, depressed, aggressive, or paranoid. When you add into the mix the less conventional medication he was getting from his Dr. Feelgood, Max Jacobson, it is a wonder that any of us are still alive. If you'd like to find out more about John F. Kennedy, then there are literally hundreds of books and films to choose from, but I'd recommend this one. It is a biography by Robert Dallek. It contains a lot of information about his medical history. I don't agree with all of it, but it's a very good read and very well researched, and it's available through my Amazon store page. So I'll just say thank you for watching, as always, and if you'd like to find out any more about how mental health has affected celebrities and historical figures, then subscribe to my channel and hit the notifications bell to be kept up to date with latest releases. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Goodbye for now.